This is BBC Scotland on 2. In place of our published programmes, we're now presenting a tribute to the Scottish conductor Sir Alexander Gibson, who died in London last weekend. It's introduced by one of his lifelong friends, Bill McHugh, and includes a performance of Sibelius's Fifth Symphony.
First and foremost, he was a Scot. He believed in Scotland. He believed he had things to do for Scotland. And Scotland was home. And he really saw no reason to go anywhere else.
Alex's influence is everywhere in our music, in every note that's played in Scotland.
This tribute to Sir Alexander Gibson begins appropriately enough here in Glasgow's Theatre Royal, the home of Scottish opera, which Alec founded in 1962. A week ago today, I was here singing the Lord Chancellor in Iolanthe. We had 2 performances that day, and it was after the matinee that the news of Alec's death was announced to the company. It was a most terrible shock. In performance, Alec was such an inspirational conductor, but in his private life, he was a very shy man. In 1978, I was given a rare opportunity to show the qualities the public never saw in a television conversation at his home, and he told me about his first visit to the opera.
My Aunt Isabel took me to the Theatre Royal to see my first...
Theatre Royal, yes.
Our Theatre Royal, but it wasn't ours then.
No.
To see Carl Rosa doing Madame Butterfly.
Ah, what age were you then?
I was about between 12 and 13. And I always remember seeing John Hammond singing Butterfly and Parry Jones singing Pinkerton.
He had opera completely at heart. And as soon as he was back in Glasgow and in charge of the SNO, this became one of his high priorities. And he saw the SNO as part of it, of course. The orchestra on which the Scottish Opera Company was founded was the SNO. And I think that was one of its great advantages in its early years, that this opera company had a very fine symphony orchestra in the pit.
The Scottish orchestra, as it was then, had been in the hands of some fairly surly types, and it was definitely the moment for a Scot to take over. There was a headline in the Scotsman which said that the SNO gets new conductor and he's a Scot. And I think perhaps there should have been an addendum saying, and that's a good thing too. I think Alex forced us here in Scotland, forced all the music making here in Scotland to look at itself from the outside, not just to navel gaze, not just to concentrate on being Scottish, but to see what happened here in a much wider context, in a world context.
Alexander Gibson was a great musician and a great conductor. I think his greatest achievement must have been to found Scottish opera with Peter Hemmings in the way that he did. Within not very many years of his taking up that challenge, the company was giving work which was the admiration of the world, I mean, culminating in marvellous performances of great, great masterpieces like Berlioz's The Trojan.
Do once more, if you can wait after you've done Seas a Refuge.
The Trojans was a very special event. It was a landmark in British musical history. I was sitting in one of the boxes above the orchestra. I can't quite describe what it felt like. It was the culmination of all the weeks of work that we'd done, hearing the orchestra, which is always a thrill after you've been slogging away with piano, to suddenly hear him conduct this marvellous score and feel a part of that. And think, yes, we're ready for the public. This piece is under our belts and we're ready to go, like racehorses, you know, at the starting gate. It was a wonderful moment. I'll never forget that moment in that box, looking down at him in the pit, having prepared us all for this quite momentous production, which of course it turned out to be.
People often say what really matters is what the musicians think of a conductor. Well, there's some truth in this, but it doesn't go far enough. There's no doubt that the musicians are the first to recognize a conductor's faults. They can also recognize his good points. But in the end, they're so involved in the business of playing the music that they're not really the best judges of a performance. No, in the end, the real judge of a conductor is the audience, the public who are going to pay. They are the ones who usually decide whether a conductor's career will be successful.
Well, I played for him for many years. I think I probably first played for him when I was 16. And I'm very, very glad that I had the opportunity, you know, having changed horses, so to speak. In the last few years, I went to Alex's concerts as a critic. And the change in my perception of his music making has really been quite extraordinary. I'm talking very specifically about Alex here, but there was a lot of music when I played for him that I didn't understand what it was that he was trying to do. Things became fractured, sometimes things weren't very well together. And it was sometimes very frustrating then to read in the papers about what a wonderful performance it was when you knew that things had been wrong. But I found, listening to him, and I particularly remember a Brahms symphony that he did with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra last year, and suddenly it just made the most enormous sense. That music made more sense to me than it ever had in any time in my playing career.
He was very specially in tune with Sibelius's music. I think that's now fairly fully recognized. His affinity with that music, which was often understated, for one thing, and that was an aspect which seemed to suit Gibson. But he also had this ability to bring Sibelius's music to a climax and then let it resettle again. His pacing, his sense of the structure of the music was very, very strong. He was above all a lyricist, and he had a sense of poetry about him. And these were qualities he could bring to Sibelius and bring out of Sibelius. And I think that's what made him a great Sibelius conductor.
We knew Alex and his wife and his family for many, many years, since the 1960s, on and off the platform and the stage. And he was in my house during the last performances that he did at the Coliseum last September. They came over and we had a lovely Sunday together. And I was thinking that day, strangely enough, how little he had changed from the person I'd always known. I was thinking this at the lunch table. This is the same Alex I've always known. It's a remarkable thing to be able to say over a lifetime. Of course people change, of course they do. But fundamentally, if they remain the same human being at the core, I think there's something terrifically privileged about knowing a person like that.
I can't imagine my life completely without music. But I sometimes think what it would be like to be able to treat music as a hobby, like reading, going to the theatre. I could play the piano more for my own pleasure. I'm interested in paintings. I spend a lot of time reading books about music generally, about the latest recordings, and so on. But then music's my hobby as well as my profession.
When he gave up being conductor of Scottish Opera and the SNO, he had more time to study, more time to travel, and to undertake the sort of concerts and to conduct the sort of operas that he wanted to do. He also had more time to be with us in the Academy, and that was very special, and it was a great privilege for us. He conducted the students only last term in a wonderful concert with Elgar's Second Symphony and Sibelius' Sixth Symphony, which isn't done very often. Marvelous. He inspired them to reach heights that they didn't know they had in them.
The sad thing is that at the time of his death last week, he seemed on the verge of reaching that glowing India summer which gifted conductors often seem to reach when they're in their late 60s and 70s. My own last experience of him conducting was last month at the Edinburgh Festival Theatre, when he was conducting once again his beloved Madame Butterfly, and it was a wonderful performance. I've never heard him conduct it better. It was eloquent, beautifully phrased, not hurried in any way. Every Puccini pause was savoured. Every musical line was savoured. It was vintage Gibson, and I'm glad in that respect that I shall remember him for that last Butterfly.
This is a time of great sadness among Scotland's musical family, but also a time of gratitude for the vision, achievements, and for the life of Sir Alexander Gibson. We end tonight with a performance of Sibelius' Fifth Symphony, recorded in 1978 with the Scottish National Orchestra. But first, Alec recalls a tribute from one of his heroes, Sir John Barbirolli.
When I went to conduct his orchestra, his Halley Orchestra, as a guest, one night they had some proms which were subsidized by some beer-making firm in Manchester, and they had a reception afterwards, and he came for the second half and heard me doing Brahms too, and then came on and had to make a speech, and I remember him saying, "They're very beautiful Gibson." And that was the greatest tribute I could have had from him. Martin Milner told me that.
Martin Milner, yes.
Martin Milner, who was leading.
Yes.
He said, the old man says, "Very beautiful Gibson." So that was enough for me.